Welcome to the Your Audio Solutions podcast, episode 13. Today we have the awesome Grammy Award winning producer, engineer, mixer, John Paterno. He has worked with artists like Robbie Williams, the Steve Gadd Band, Eros Ramazzotti, The Thrills, and many other cool artists and bands. It was awesome having John on the podcast, and I really enjoyed talking to him. And I hope you, the listener, will feel the same listening to this episode. And in this interview with John, we spoke about, we started out speaking about working with Steve Gadd, recording drums, doing too much edits, guitar pedals, and how to use a flanger. Or actually, I had a question of how to use a flanger because I never know what the hell to play when I have a flanger on my guitar. So he gave some tips. So if you're a guitar player, you might like that. We also spoke about how he got started in music engineering, starting out in Los Angeles as an independent assistant, as John likes to put it. How he became a staff assistant at Sunset Sound. How that led him to work with Tchad Blake, assisting him for a few years. And how working with Tchad taught him about focus and some awesome records you should check out. Made by Tchad Blake. And there's one record I can't find anywhere, which John mentions in this episode, and I believe it's called Documenting Zimbabwe, if I'm not off. Let me check. Yes, it's called Document Zimbabwe. It's by Real World Records, and it's a record Tchad Blake did, a binaural recording, but he didn't use a dummy head. You will hear it in the interview. It sounded quite cool, and I'd love to hear it. So if someone knows where to find it, let me know. We also spoke about how his work as a freelancer and how he builds relationships and how you find new clients. If a Grammy is as important for your career nowadays. We spoke about how it's all about the song and what the difference is between a great song and a hit, and the importance and the benefits of learning other people's songs as a songwriter. And we spoke about how the Beatles did that in their beginning when they started out in Hamburg, in Germany. We spoke about how John runs his business without the help of a manager, and his process of understanding his clients, and how that helps him determine his rates and so forth, and how to meet expectations of what the artist wants their music to sound like, and the importance of asking questions, and how that allows you to understand the artist you're working with and all the benefits that would have for you as an engineer, producer, whatever you are. Questions are important and will help you understand the clients you're working with. It's similar to the conversation I had with Nicholas Di Lorenzo from Australia a few weeks ago, episode 10 or something. So if you check that one out too, we go deeper into that subject. But I think, you're going to love this interview with John. Some great wisdom and knowledge from him. But before we get into this great interview, I want to tell you about a guide I made. It's called 3 Tested Ways to Increase Your Client Base. And I made this guide for people who are freelancers, have a home studio, or work in a professional studio and want to increase their client base. And if your technical skills are already up to par, and you probably already spent your whole life making music, but the only thing that's missing is the clients. Or if you have finished your college degree and are looking to get your foot in the door of a recording studio. And the benefits of reading this guide is that you will learn how to contact bands online, how to build profitable relationships, how to make clients coming back for more, how to price yourself, how to get your foot in the door. So check this free guide out by using the link below in the description. I think you will love it and find it very useful. So that's it for today. Now over to John Paterno. Okay, John, so welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here. I thought it would be a cool place to start because I just listened to Steve Gadd's song Africa yesterday from the album Gratitude, I believe you worked on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that song
Oh,
really impressed me in that it creates this tension. Even though they're playing so minimal. I don't know if you remember the song exactly, but because it was quite a few years since it came out. But that song really impressed me in that it was so to build up that there was really tense, like something was gonna happen.
Yeah.
But everybody was
Well,
playing
it's like,
really sparsely.
but there's two feels going on, and that's where the tension is, and that's what's brilliant about Steve Gadd. So the trumpet player is playing with a real swing feel, and the other guys might be feeling swing, but it also feels kind of straight eighths at the same time. So there are these moments where you feel like it's, you can get lost in it either way. And if you concentrate either way, you can make your way all the way through the song as feeling it straight eighths or feeling it as a swing thing. And when I went to mix it, that was one of the things that I tried to make sure came through. And of course, my machine's going out of record again. So sorry about that.
That's fine.
So we're going to have to rely on your audio.
Yeah.
For all of this.
No problem.
But that was one of the most interesting things. And then the other thing is when we cut the track originally, Steve said to the bass player, Steve said, "Hey man, play it this way." And that's the bass that ended up on the final recording. And he had to move the feel a little bit. And once he did, it opened it up. So it's great that you really tuned into that, because these are the things that make that song super unique.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I'm gonna recommend people listening to this podcast to check that song out because it's really cool.
Yeah.
Nice. So how did you mix that album, or was it also recording? Or was it,
I mixed it as well. Yeah, I recorded it and mixed it. Yeah,
that's cool, man. Does Steve have a lot of input on his drum sound, or that's all part of the recording, I guess?
When we did the tracking, he didn't say all that much. So I just figured he was happy. And I think he was at the end of the day. It was a really cool session in that there wasn't a lot of, how can I put this? It just wasn't a lot of like, okay, are you ready to record? Are you ready to do this? John, are you okay? It was more like they would work up the tunes. I would be working on the sounds. When I thought they were ready to do a take, I would just slide my hand over and put the machine in a record. Nobody ever said, okay, let's do a take. Nobody ever said anything like that. They would play the song down and they would just immediately stop and come in, and it was cool. Like they expected to listen, but I always, but I was with them, and it was a really cool synergy. And it's something that I've always tried to do when I make records, always feel like I'm not obtrusive. I mean, obviously if something's wrong, you have to stop, but otherwise you just stay out of the way.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's cool, man. I mean, it's awesome to work with amazing musicians, I've had the opportunity to do that a few times, and it's cool.
Yeah, it allows you to focus on other things. It allows you to think about other things, and because you're not immediately going, okay, well, this is what I'm going to have to do to get this thing from point A to point B. And sometimes with less experienced players that don't have a really good sound to their playing, or feel, then you kind of have to deal with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Are you a drummer by chance?
I'm not a drummer, but I've always been into drumming. I've had friends who are drummer, and they love to talk about drumming.
No, because I'm a guitar player, but I love drummers. I love recording drummers, and I totally totally dig it. Yeah,
exactly. It's the most fun instrument to record, in my opinion, because you have so many tools to play with. I guess not in mics per se, but just. The drum makes up a lot of the sound of the record, depending on the music, I guess. But
yeah, no, I can see what you're saying. Yeah, I love recording drums too. But I love recording drums with as many other people playing at the same time as possible.
With as many as possible, you said?
As many other people, yeah. So yeah. I mean, because it feels like you make the record right then and there. Right? The more people you have, the arrangement's more worked out, the whole landscape's more worked out, and you can really tailor that moment and make it something special.
Yeah.
And, because today a lot of records, the drummer, okay, I have this song idea. I'm going to send this to my drummer friend. He's going to record it in his place. And then the bass player, I should get him. He'd be great. And he does it as his place and his thing, or he or she. And it just doesn't make for a record that feels like it's put together in the moment. So when you go to mix it, then you have to kind of take all these things, and then you realize, oh man, I wish the bass player would have used this, or I wish the guitar player would have thought about this. But if they don't have the context or the direction, it's really difficult for that to happen.
Yeah.
So when you have drums, bass, keyboards, 2 guitar players, like I've got to record, like I went to Nashville at one point and I had like 10 people playing at the same time.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was stressful on one hand, because it's like you got to get it done, and you're recording 3 songs a day and you're doing it in X amount of time. But man, when you played that record back, it felt like it was done. You throw some vocals on, you do a little of this and a little of that, and that's it. The arrangement's there, it's in place. And a lot of my favorite records are done that way. So that's why I think still gravitate to that.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree, man. Unfortunately, I don't get to do that too often. And also what I find is when you do record, as separate instruments, is that I tend to always try to time them almost too perfectly with the drums, for example, because they didn't play together,
Right.
So it's not that thing either. So it almost makes the record too perfect because there's so much editing. I don't know.
Well, that's it. You start to get into that thing where, because there's no real synergy of, okay, here's a funny phrase, synergy of the moment, right?
Right.
Because that to me is where music, and that's where feel comes about, and the people that are doing stuff in their bedroom or just, they may have a grand studio, but they're on their own and they're so focused on their own thing and their own sound and how the toms sound and how perfect it is. But perfection is always context related, I mean, some of my favorite takes may not ever have been completely in time and on the groove, and on the beat or whatever, but they feel so good that, I don't get that whole perfection mentality or my shit changed as the time went on. So, at the end of the day, the so-and-so messed up my sound or whatever. I mean, stuff makes no sense to me because everything is context related.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to let that go, right? So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, what was I gonna say? I think also when you do as an engineer, or if you're editing a song, whatever, that you get so down in the detail that the listener would never actually notice. You gotta have confidence to maybe get a bigger picture when you do the edits.
Yeah, I think so. And I have this saying that I have for myself. I ask myself all the time, okay, is what's pulling me out of the record? What's distracting me from what's going on? And those are the things I deal with kind of first, right? Because obviously they're glaring to me. And if they're glaring to me, they could be distracting to the listener. And so those are the first things. But as far as editing to a grid and making everything perfect, I mean, that's part of the reason why music can be so generic now and feel so like cookie cutter.
Yeah, totally.
And it is. I mean, it's a product of the times, and it's a product of people and how they make music now. And I get that. And but if we're talking real players, and if we're talking if we're talking real players and if we're talking editing, I mean, there's a D'Angelo record called Voodoo. I don't know if you're familiar with that record.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
Can you imagine if somebody grabbed that record and tried to put everything in time and lined up all the bass drum, and lined up all the bass hits with the drums and it would be a mess. I mean, and that record has got so many subtle layers, and that's the stuff that is getting lost in a lot of the computer age. Okay, here's a loop, here's that. I mean, people are fighting back against it, and there are those things out there that definitely go against the grain, and they're super refreshing when you hear them. You know, I mean, I did a record with this guy Andrew Sinowick not too long ago, and he had a really well rehearsed band. We had 2 drummers playing at the same time.
Cool.
And I set them up 5 feet in front of each other, 6 feet in front of each other, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
It was so great. We didn't do one overdub after we finished. We just edited some takes, and it's a really fun, cool, energetic record.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's the stuff I'm really into.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that reminds me of, you know, Tedeschi Trucks Band or Allman Brothers Band. They had the same setup. I'm always so fascinated by how they compose the drum parts when you have 2 drummers, because obviously a different section they play different stuff. It's very interesting how they compose the parts for those sections.
You know, it's funny. I hadn't thought about it until I'd heard this band live before we actually went into the studio, and I think the other bands you mentioned, the key is the drummers have to have a similar feel. So if one guy's got a really wide, splashy swing kind of feel, and another guy's really kind of straight and tight and, you know, really 16th note, no swing to it at all, that's could be more difficult, just because the whole thing won't sway in the same way.
Right.
But if you get 2 players with a similar feel, it can be super cool. And as long as you don't make it feel like it's super magnified, then it can be a really great sound. And so I was very fortunate with Andrew's record, because that's what those players were. Those guys, Jake and Blair, they sound really, really good together.
Okay, that's cool, man. So is that a record that's out or is out?
Yeah, it's called Andrew Sinowick's Second Story. And if you go on his website, actually the spelling, it's actually, if you go on my website, if you go johnpaternomusic.com, and if you look on my discography page, it's up in the upper left. And that there's a Spotify link right there. And if you go on Andrew's website, he's got some videos that were shot, so you can actually see the recording.
Cool.
You know, you can kind of get a glimpse of how the recording was done too.
Nice.
So
yeah, I'll find that and put that in the description below, so people can check that out.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Awesome.
Cool, man. I mean, we started off in a slightly different thing that I expected, but that's totally fine.
All right, we'll go wherever you want to go. I had a really fine cup of coffee this morning, so I'm raring to go. So
nice, man. But so if you could tell us how you got started in music, did your parents were they involved in music, or what was your first taste of music?
My father played guitar when I was a little kid. I was always into music. Like there was always music in the house. For me, it was the Beatles early on, and apparently I would take a pencil and put it into a vinyl record and spin it around and just keep saying, you know, my version of the word music as a really young child, just trying to get my parents to just play music.
Yeah.
My dad had played guitar a little bit. So when I was 7 or 8, I actually started grabbing his guitar and started to, you know, just figure it out a little bit. So yeah, it's been an obsession with me, you know, pretty much since the beginning.
Yeah. So what was the first Beatles song you can remember hearing?
Oh man, I saw her standing there. That count off. I saw her standing there.
Right.
You know, the Paul counting off, just that 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And I think at the same time, it made me fascinated with recording, because every time you hit play, that energy is preserved. That whole thing is right there. And, you know, I can remember being a kid and just literally just doing that. Just I would just listen to the count off and then pull the needle up and do it again and just be amazed at like, whoa, this is so exciting.
Yeah.
You know, and then the band kicks in and then it's a whole other level. But even just that much. So yeah, that was the initial thing for sure.
Nice. And how did you get started playing guitar then? Was that through your dad playing?
Yeah, just watching my dad play, and then I started taking lessons a little bit here and there, and I was fortunate to find a guy who would basically show me songs. So he would come over, and I mean, for better or for worse, because I didn't learn how to read. But he would write out chord symbols and the forms of songs, and I would learn. He'd do little chord block diagrams, and so I was really into the Beatles. And then at that time, that the band Kiss was a thing, so I would learn Beatles songs and Kiss songs. So that was
Yeah.
that was it up until I was like 11 or 12 before we moved, because I lived in New York at that time, and then we moved to South Florida when I was 12. And then from that point on, it was a lot of just learning on my own. And, Van Halen had just hit around that time.
Yeah.
So I got super into Van Halen.
Yeah.
Mm.
So what was your first guitar then? Was it a Fender or Gibson? What was your thing
Oh,
back then?
no, neither. No, it took me a long time before I got a Fender or a Gibson. My
Right.
first guitar was this, and I wish I still had it, was this really funky Japanese kind of looked like a Strat kind of knockoff. And then the first kind of good guitar I got was a Les Paul shape, but it had a bolt-on neck, and I still have that guitar.
Oh, okay, cool.
I still have that guitar today, and I've got really heavy gauge strings on it. And so when I get into stuff where I need to do drop tuning, or if I need to like more kind of metal kind of sounding things that's pitched down, that guitar sounds great for it.
Awesome.
So I'm so happy that I held on to it all these years.
Yeah, yeah.
And then my first good, proper like major level guitar was a Strat. Yeah, that I bought when I was I think I was a junior in high school. So it would have been 16 or 17. And I worked for it. I went out and I got a job, and my dad bought me a guitar amp when I was like 12 years old, and he said, and I don't think he was being particularly mean. He was just kind of straightforward. He goes, "Well, don't expect me to buy any more of this stuff for you."
Yeah.
Like, okay, so I went out and got, I delivered papers. I worked in restaurants from age 14 and 15, and yeah, worked hard because I wanted a Strat. I totally wanted a Strat. So yeah.
That's cool, man. Did you ever get into pedals and stuff? Did you ever had like an obsession with that, or
Oh,
you
yeah.
still do
I mean,
maybe?
I still do. Oh,
Right.
yeah, it's ridiculous. As a matter of fact, I do these videos for Pure Mix,
Yeah.
and they have a series of this song called Lifeboats, where a bunch of people are mixing the same song, but no one had heard it before they actually mixed it.
Yeah, that series is awesome, man. I haven't seen yours yet, but that's a great concept they have done.
Yeah,
It's
I
super
thought
valuable.
it was, and
Yeah.
so I had stayed away from the song. I made sure I didn't listen to it, and so when I got my hands on it, I pulled the guitar pedals out, and so I actually used them to process the guitars, and I've used them a lot in the past. Like, I always use guitar pedals when I mix. I love it. Love them when I mix. So yeah, I had an early obsession. I was also into Rush when I was a kid,
Right.
and so my first guitar pedal was an Electro Harmonix Electric Mistress flanger.
Okay.
And I was also into taking things apart. So I had broken that at some point but at some point I kind of like, man, I wish I had one of those again. And I bought one, and I found a vintage one that was probably about the same time that I bought mine when I was a kid. And I love that thing. I use it a lot.
That's
So,
cool, man.
yeah.
I mean, as a guitar player myself, I never really know what to do with a flanger. You know? I don't know what I should play when it's on. How do you think about a flanger?
Well, what's cool about them, I mean, and they're all different. Like the MXR one is way different than the Electro Harmonix one.
Right.
So like the MXR one, as a guitar player, it makes me feel kind of Van Halen-ish, it's got a real metallic kind of thing. The Electro Harmonix one, it's metallic, but it also has a bit of kind of a sweeter kind of hiss to it, right? So, so when I think about that, I think about chords and I think about maybe kind of just strumming, so like a cleaner kind of strumming sound, just have this beautiful kind of, this periodic phasiness kind of going through the whole thing.
Right.
So, it's I kind of let the pedals inspire the sound sometimes too. It's just like, oh, well, let me see if this will work. So I'll hook something up. And sometimes you get inspired and it works. And sometimes you're like, oh, okay, maybe this isn't the exact one. And that's what's nice about having a bunch. And I own way too many friggin' pedals.
Oh, that's always the thing.
So I have the dual disease. Like I'm a guitar player and then I also engineer. So so I have a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm. But so when you use guitar pedals in mixing and stuff, do you need to use what's it called? Impedance matcher, like a reverse. What's it called? Reamp box.
Yeah, kind of like well, yeah. You can call it a reamp box. You can call it just a bump box. You need to make sure you have a way to interface the pedals so that they don't blow up, basically. So I use this Little Labs PCP, it's called. Right. And what it is, it's a 3-input. It's got 3 inputs on the back, and you can convert line level signal to guitar level signal. And that box is a little more fancy in that you have a few other options. You can route inputs to outputs, but it's got a ground lift on it. It's got a phase button, which is super important. Right. And then the other thing I use it for is it has a line level DI built into it. So you plug into the front and the signal out of the back comes out line level. So you don't have to deal with a mic preamp.
Right.
So that just basically becomes an effects loop for me.
Right.
And so yeah, it works out perfectly. And then if I need to do stereo, then I get the level down, and then I just go into a pair of mic pre's at that point. I use the DI ins on. Usually, I have a couple of Chandler LTD ones that I've had for ages that I really like. So I'll go into the DI inputs on that, and then use the mic pre's to get the level back up.
Ah, I see. That's cool, man.
Yeah.
So you started playing guitar. You have your pedals. How did you get into engineering?
Well, as I was getting out of high school, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And, it's kind of presented to me that maybe being a musician wasn't the best thing I should do by my dad.
Right.
And so it took me a few years. I was going to be an electrical engineer. And so I started taking classes. I was taking math and physics and calculus and chemistry and all this stuff. But I also got a job at a music store at the same time. And so when I got the job at the music store, it was awesome. I was a kid in a candy store, and some guys I was playing in a band with at the time were also working there. So that was fun. And then I got kind of roped into the repair shop and was helping with electronic repairs. So I was getting into electronics. I was getting into systems, biasing Marshall heads and fixing blown up, PA amplifiers and things like that. So after a couple of years of that, I had read about this program at the University of Miami, and it was a music engineering program. And at the time, there were only 2 or 3 places in the U.S. that you could do this. There was Berkeley, there was Miami, there was North Texas, I think, were the 3 places. North Texas State were the 3 kind of main places to do that. Middle Tennessee State's program might have been happening, and then that place Full Sail was just getting going around that time, and that was something that I looked at for a second too. But I ended up in Miami.
Okay.
But the thing about Miami is it was the music school. All this was done under the umbrella of the music school, so you had to be proficient at an instrument. And there's a joke: how do you get a guitar player to turn down? Right? You give them a chart.
Yeah.
And I was the definition of that. So I took a 6-month crash course in jazz and somehow got into school. I still don't know how I actually made it in, but that was it. And then I was there for 3 years and then moved out here in 1990, May of 1990. Yeah.
Right. And is that when you started working for Tchad Blake? Because I know you were his assistant, right?
Yeah, no, it took me a year when I first came out, I was an independent assistant, which is a really weird thing. But there were so many studios at the time, and a lot of one-room facilities, and so they would have their main guy, and it was mostly guys at that point. I don't think they were very. I couldn't. In the 90s, I could. There were maybe 2 female engineers I had ever run across, and that's a shame, and I'm really glad to see all that's changed at this point. But I mean, it's still not great, but it's way, way better than when I first started. But yeah, so I got involved in these situations where, like, I would be the second person in a one-room facility. So the main guy would be in there, and he'd work 80-hour weeks for like 4 weeks at a time, and he'd need a break. So then I'd get a call and I'd go in and fill in. And it was a little daunting at first because it's just like, oh crap, how am I going to make a living? But it all kind of worked out. And what was awesome is that you had to learn how the phones worked, the coffee worked, the headphones worked.
Yeah.
Those, like, if you learned those 3 things about any room you went to, you could make it through a session.
Right.
And I got really good at that. And it was fun. It appeals to kind of my nature too, because I'm really hands-on, and I'm always interested in how stuff works, how systems are put together. And that was probably the whole impetus to get into engineering. So, right. And my friend, one of my best friends, is a guy named Joe Barisi, who's a brilliant engineer and producer. So he kind of turned me on to a couple of these people and places early on. And then, but through another friend, I ended up at Sunset Sound. They had a guy there who, unfortunately, he got a drinking and driving citation.
Right.
And part of his punishment was he had to go pick up trash on the side of the highway for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So Sunset Sound needed somebody to fill in for 6 weeks. And so a friend of mine there, another guy I went to college with, he recommended me. And I went in and talked to them, and they had me in for that time. And they were really happy. And they were like, look, if we have a position that opens up, we're going to hire you. So I said, okay, great. And whatever, I went off and did. But 6 or 8 months later, they called me and they said, look, we would really like you to come on and be a staff assistant here. And so I worked out the terms and the deal, and yeah, I got hired.
Nice.
And then a few months later, it was just like LA was super slow that summer. And the manager at Sunset Sound said, oh, well, we have this, they had a sister studio called Sound Factory. And I had done some work over there as well. And they're like, oh, well, he goes, there's a 6-week record coming in with this band, Los Lobos. He goes, I'm going to put you on it. Bring a good book, because Tchad Blake is engineering and none of the other assistants want to work with him because he does everything by himself. And I'm like, okay, fine. But there's no way I was going to sit around. So that was my first experience, my first big experience with Tchad. I'd been around him once or twice before, but yeah, and it turned out to be like the best thing ever. And it was the Los Lobos record called Kiko, which is, if you don't know that record, it's brilliant. So yeah, that was it. That was my start with him. And everything he did at Sound Factory for the next 4 or 5 years, I was there for all of it.
That's awesome, man. I mean, just to go back a bit. So first of all, how did you get to know how did you get to know Joe Barisi then? How was he? How did that?
Joe and I were in Miami together. We were at the University of Miami together, and he was a year and a half ahead of me, even though we're closer in age than that. But yeah, I mean, he was just there's this whole persona of him, right? He's known as "quote unquote" evil Joe Barisi, but he is the sweetest guy on the planet, and but he doesn't take any bullshit from people either. So he's awesome, and we hit it off right away. And the way Miami worked is, when you got in, the way to get into the studios is there was a whole mentorship program. So you had to ask upperclassmen to sit in on their sessions, to learn the rooms that way. And then you would take these tests, and then you'd have to have these guided sessions where you'd always have to have an upperclassman with you. So, and then the sessions would go in 4 or 5 hour blocks, and they would go from 9 p.m. at night till 6 in the morning. So you could end up with a 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. session.
Wow.
So you would literally get your butt out of bed and you'd go to the studio at 3 a.m. and have those 3 or 4 hours.
Right.
So I would assist Joe on those 3 and 4 a.m. sessions when they came up, and because I just wanted to be in the studio. So we really hit it off. Then we ended up roommates for a while, for like a semester or maybe a whole year. I can't remember. And then he moved. He got out of school and he went to LA right away. And then we had always stayed in touch. But yeah, so we've known each other for a really long time.
Wow, that's cool, man.
Yeah.
And then how was your first period or first few months getting settled in LA? Was it hard to get it going, or
I was super, super fortunate. That year I had come out here in like March. It was 1990. I moved out here in May of 90, but in March of 90, I came out looking for a job. And so I brought a bunch of resumes around, and, studios were all over the place. It was really cool. Like, you're in LA, the weather's, I grew up in a sunny place, but a stupidly humid and hot place. So LA was just like, okay, there's sun, there's no humidity. Look at all of this. It was cool. Studios everywhere. And I was initially going to be a repair person. I was going to be a tech.
Right.
And I figured I'd start that way and then transition in, and I had a line on a place. They were going to hire me. And I found out 2 weeks after I went back home to Florida that everybody on staff quit.
Yeah.
So, but in the process of being out here and hanging out with Joe and a bunch of my other friends who I knew from school, we ended up going out with the studio manager of this place Joe had worked a lot. It's called Cornerstone. And so 2 weeks before I moved out, I was going to move out without a job, and Joe had graciously offered to let me crash on his couch with his other roommates who I was also friends with. And but he called me and said, "Hey, Maddie, the studio manager, he wants to know if you want a job." And they had 2 studios. They had Cornerstone, and then they had this house studio called Preferred. And they need somebody, are you up for it? And I said, yeah, definitely. So that was my first job. I did that. And then 6 weeks into my first job, though, Maddie grabs me and goes, you came here to kind of replace somebody. And I'm like, yeah. He said, well, he goes, there's an engineer coming in and he wants to work with the guy you replace. He doesn't want to work with you. So I don't have any work for you for 6 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
So it was like, oh, crap. And but that's when the Sunset Sound thing came in, right? Or that's when some of these other gigs, these one-off things. So, there you have your oh shit moments a couple of times, but it all worked out.
Yeah.
And then once the Sunset staff thing came up, then then it kind of threw me on a path, and I met a lot of cool people, worked on a lot of cool records, and worked with a lot of really great engineers too.
Yeah, for sure, man. So what was one of the main things you learned from working with Tchad Blake then?
Focus. That dude is completely just like laser beam focus. Mitchell Froome too, by the way. You'd work 8 hours with those guys, and you were tired at the end of those 8 hours because it was nonstop. They were always thinking about the process. They were always experimenting, but they were always imagining. And 8 hours with those guys was like working 12 or 14 hours with just about anybody else, because everybody else, a lot of times, is just a fishing expedition. Oh, well, what if we try this? Oh, let's get a guitar sound. Oh, let's think about this part. I mean, I'm sounding like I'm whining a little bit, but it was more timid. And Mitchell would be like, okay, well, let's try this. Okay. And then it would inspire him to do something else. And then that would inspire Tchad. And then before you know it, there was like amazing sound coming out of the speaker.
Right.
And then you just kind of get a take. And, and the other thing about Tchad is that two things about Tchad. He, just his engineering chops, like he's known to like kind of be like to kind of just skew things, right? Mess them up, distort and compress and like do all this stuff. But his just kind of more straight engineering skills were ridiculously good. Like he's an artist. I mean, that's really what he is at the end of the day. So like all artists, right, they have a strong technical foundation. And with Tchad, I wouldn't call it technical because it's all like intuitive with him. So he's not a numbers and maths guy, but he's got a strong sense of what sounds good and how things are put together. And the other thing with Tchad is his whole binaural thing. And it is brilliant. And I've been rediscovering that even now. Like I found a record that he did in the 90s that just completely blew me away. Okay. Completely. And I've had it on a bunch of times. It's called Document Zimbabwe. And it came out on the Real World label. Right. He went to Africa, he went to Zimbabwe, and he did all these binaural recordings. It's super hard to find. I posted about it recently on my Instagram and on Facebook. And I had a bunch of people saying, I can't find this record. Where can I find this record? And so maybe it was enough of a nudge to Real World to think about doing something. I don't know. I don't know anybody at Real World anymore. But
right.
But man, it's such a beautiful record. It's beautifully recorded. It's all binaural, no processing at all.
Wow.
And it's so realistic.
So he used the dummy head to record it then, I guess, or
no, he didn't even do that.
Okay.
no, and this is the ingenuity and brilliance of Tchad Blake. And so when you ask me about what I get from him, right, this is the stuff I get from him.
Right.
It's not the Sans Amp settings. It's not the Devil Lock thing. Uh-huh. And it's not me trying to be him because every time I've tried to be Tchad, I fail.
Yeah, sure.
100%.
Yeah.
Just don't hear it that way.
No, exactly.
But he put microphones in his ears. He had a Sony DAT recorder. Actually, it was Sony microphones, Sony Omnis that he put in his ear, and in his ears, and then he had a portable DAT recorder, and that's how he did it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Ridiculously good.
Well, so basically, he just sat in the room with the players, and he was the mic stand, so to speak.
Exactly, yeah. Found the spot, sat there, didn't move, didn't turn his head, probably didn't bounce his head.
Yeah.
And just closed his eyes and kind of was part of it. Wow. Yeah. So great. This record's brilliant. Like I listen to it a lot now that I rediscovered it.
Yeah.
And I even called him, was just gushing about it. I'm like, man, this is so good. This is so good. How can I not? He was pretty funny.
Oh, that's really cool, man. I didn't expect that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So do you have that album on a vinyl, is it? Or do you just have the CD?
It's on CD. It's on CD.
Right.
At that point, that record came out in the mid 90s. So at that point, things were not coming out on vinyl really at all.
Right.
So, by that point. Although it's funny, I found there's another record Tchad and Mitchell did around that time. Is this band American Music Club, and the record's called Mercury.
Right.
It's another record that I've kind of rediscovered, and it's so beautiful. It's a little dark, conceptually. The songs are heavy and but it's so good. And I had no idea there was even a vinyl pressing of it. But I started looking, and it looks like it came out on vinyl in Europe.
Oh, okay.
But
cool.
I don't think it was released on vinyl in America. So there was that transition point in like 92, 93, 94, or whenever those records happened. So
yeah, nice, man. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff to check out. Hopefully, I'm gonna find that Zimbabwe album.
Good luck.
Yeah, you have to buy it on eBay. That's cool, man. So after working with Tchad, was it for 5 years? Did you say?
Yeah.
So
and there were other things that came in and out. Like, I'd met Joe Ciccarelli in that period. There was an engineer named Bill Jackson who I had learned a ton from. Kevin Killen. I got to work with Kevin Killen a couple of times. And,
Right.
So all these really, really cool engineers that kind of just, happen to
nice
cross my path. Yeah.
Well, so did you then become essentially a freelance engineer after the?
Yeah. I got asked to do this record, and it kind of put me on the path. There's this record by this band called That Dog was the first record that I was asked to kind of engineer, and the producer was also an engineer. He's a really sweet guy and really good at his thing too. Brad Wood, his name is. He's a producer. He's probably best known for that big Liz Phair record that happened in the 90s. But he's super busy now. He works on all these really great indie records and he was a Chicago guy. So he came out, we did the record at Sound Factory, and that was kind of my first one. And then I ended up right after that doing a film score with the Los Lobos guys.
Right.
This film called Feeling Minnesota, which was really fun, but a really, really funny experience at the end of the day. But good. Yeah.
Nice, man. But so when you then became, your own boss, essentially, what was your approach to find or build relationships and find new clients? What was that? How did that look for you?
For me, it's always been a word of mouth thing, right? And at the time, that was much more possible because, solely as a word of mouth thing. I think at the end of the day, I'm still word of mouth. Like people are hearing what I do and contact me. And I always think that's better. If doing things like this with you, people get a feel for who I am and for my aesthetic, my ethos, my spirit, then that's a positive. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback, and I may have gotten a couple of gigs even from doing things like this. And also too, when the interviewers are good and this has already been really fun. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
But I think it's always about your word and your work. So, your reputation and what people hear. So, and I think at the end of the day, I'm going to say that a lot. Sorry.
That's fine.
That's what really gets people in the door. But the whole dynamic has changed. There's a time where you would, if you worked on a record and it did really well, people would line up to work with you, and you could see a year or 2, 3 years worth of work that just kind of falls into place.
Wow. Because
it was such a machine at that point in the 90s, 80s, 90s, into even the early 2000s, right? There was money. And when there's money, people are interested in making more money. And so opportunities are created because of that, right? Yeah. But when the money dries up, then the whole dynamic changes, right? You could have a hit record now and nobody cares. The funny part is I get called more for records that are just more indie oriented. Like those are the ones people notice. When I've worked with really, really big artists, and I've been really lucky to do that, you work on a record that sells 12 million copies, sells 14 million copies, and no one calls you to say, oh yeah, I want that guy. And it seems kind of counterintuitive, but the superstar thing is the superstar thing. And if you don't do everything about it, if you don't do the whole thing all the way through at this point, I don't think anybody really notices as much, unless you have one of those superstar mixer names. And even then, I don't know what, it means something to some people, and it doesn't, it's like getting a Grammy, which is great. I have one, fantastic.
Yeah.
But to some people that matters. But most of the people I work with, I don't think it really matters. I think they heard a record that I like, or they liked, and that to me is,
But isn't
It's
the
way more
Grammys? I
compelling.
mean, it feels like nowadays the Grammy, not to take away that you have one, obviously, but because that's awesome. But a Grammy feels less valuable nowadays because maybe there's so many people who
Well,
shares one.
and that may be very true. Hold on, my microphone's falling a little bit.
That's fine.
I mean, that may be very true, and it just depends. Like some people, it's important to, and I didn't. I mean, I appreciated that to a certain degree, but it was never my driving force. And I got, mine's a Latin Grammy for a really, really cool record that I had worked on with this woman named Soraya. And the record, some of my friends in Miami got me involved, and the record was about a 2-year period that she had where she had gone through breast cancer treatment. This was like her comeback. And this was 2 years of thoughts about what all that meant to her. So Grammy or not, it's just like, you get to help somebody get that out. So it was super cool. And to do the record and to be involved and to have her show that confidence in me, because she had heard some records I had done. My friends in Miami said, I think John's the right guy for this based on what you're talking about. And she flew me down. We cut the record in 3 days. We did all the tracking in 3 days. Right. She did her vocals. We came to LA. We mixed. And then come Grammy time, she's nominated Best Singer-Songwriter Album. But I was never on any of the paperwork. And I was never like on any of the I didn't get invited, and I was totally fine with that. And so I get a call after it all happened. They were like, "Oh, by the way, it's a singer-songwriter album award. So with the album award, then the technical people get it. So it was just me and her. So she produced it. She got another Grammy for producing it, and then I got one for engineering and mixing it.
Ah, I see.
So great. It showed up. It showed up in a box one day, a couple of months after I found out it was going on, and so I took a picture or two, sent it to my mom and dad, or sent it to my dad. My mom had just passed away at that time too. So it's a really kind of funny set of coincidences. So sent it to my dad, sent it to my family, and and then every once in a while somebody's really, oh wow, you got one of those, and it's just like, oh yeah, and so okay, great. So and I'm okay with that. I mean, people have their perceptions. People have their perceptions of quote unquote making it or of value, and if they see that as value. If they want to hire me for it, great.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. So,
but how, because I don't know if this is true or not, but I keep hearing that there's never been this much money in music in many years or ever. But
I'm shaking my head no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to ask if that's something you notice being in the center of it, basically.
Well, I mean, there is no real center at the. I mean, if there is a center, it's very small at this point. It's very concentrated, and it's all focused on one area. It seems to me. This is my 2 cents of it, right?
Right.
Record labels, and I'm saying in quotations at this point, they're not signing bands.
Sure.
They're putting teams of writers in rooms. They're finding people to sing. And they're getting programmers together. I mean, and there's a lot of that stuff going on because that's where they feel like they're going to make their money. And that's their prerogative, right? I mean, that's their job, especially record labels that are owned by corporations. And guess what? They're all owned by corporations now.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a different financial incentive than say upshot labels that are just, oh man, the world's got to hear this music. And but it's difficult for upstart labels, right? How am I gonna finance this record for something I really believe in, and how am I gonna make my money back? Let alone make a profit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the situation for a lot of things that are outside that small window. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the solution is, but it's just a matter of, I think, just kind of doing your thing and looking for those right situations. So I mean, if there's more money, I'm not seeing it, or at least it's not in records anymore.
Right.
It's really not. I mean, money. There's a lot of money still in TV and film, and there are ways to get into that, I guess. I mean, but my heart is in music. That's really where I want to be, and I just still love doing it. And then you start getting a little discouraged, and then something like David Bowie's Black Star comes out.
Yeah.
Which was a beautiful, brilliant record, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the Billie Eilish, I don't know how to say her last name, Billie Eilish, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
That record is stupid good. It is so good. And it's so inspired and so inspiring, right? And there are so many places you can take that concept and integrate real players. You can integrate more stuff. Although it sounds like, there's a nice combination of people playing on that record and the programming thing. I mean, that piano stuff is all played,
right?
And it's all, I guess, her brother does it or whatever, right? But that to me is hopeful, because then that's a really interesting synergy between the two worlds, and apparently that they're having a little bit of success with it. So,
exactly.
So that's cool and encouraging, and so.
But where do you think it's going to go? Do you think it's going to? So, I mean, we're never going to go back, obviously, and I don't think that's the point either. But do you have any idea of where you think we'll be in 10 years, 5 years?
Oh, man, I'm a horrible, horrible predictor of that. I mean, when you're working in studios and there's like, there are these kind of factory kind of rock metal records being made, right? Where like, okay, we're going to track the drums. And this becomes like a problem, right? This is like the cycle. It's like once the formula gets into place, then something comes in to disrupt. I mean, it always happens. So I have a point here. Stick with me real quick.
Right.
So like there's this whole period of records where, okay, it's like you cut the drums, you cut the basics, but you're only keeping the drums. Okay. And then you're going to take out the razor blade and you're going to edit the tape, like literally edit the 2-inch. Okay. The drums are all done. And then you're going to do the bass. So you do the bass on all the things. So, and then you're punching in on the bass to get the bass part perfect. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound like, the precursor to modern, what we were talking about, right? Editing on the grid. And you would do that. You would literally measure the distance between a kick and a snare. You would measure it and mark it on a tape machine. Right? You would measure the distance, and then you would mark a kick and a snare on a piece of tape, pull it off, and look at it. And there were people who were literally, if there was a gap between the kick and the snare, in other words, if something was late, you would physically cut out that distance, that piece of tape, and tape it back together.
Wow.
And people would spend hours on this, days on it. So people still waste the same amount of time making records now as they did then, only now you're getting carpal tunnel because you're just dealing with the computer.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't risk the potential of cutting yourself with a razor blade, but that's pretty much the only difference. You know what I mean? So yes, you don't need a tetanus shot to do this anymore.
No.
So anyway, so my point is, like, you had this factory, and then you would do the vocals at the end, which is the stupidest thing ever, because the most important part of the record, you would wait until the end when you're running out of budget because the editing always took too long, or the bass player wasn't as good, or the guitar player can't play in tune, so you're punching every other chord, right? So you'd be running out of money, and then, the singer's got to sing 10 songs, and we only have 2 weeks to do it. So you got the singer out there singing 8 hours a day, which is humanly impossible, right, to do it. And so this is the way records were done for a period of time from in the 80s into the 90s, right? And then some band called Nirvana comes along. And then overnight, all of that shit goes away.
Right.
All of it, right? So all of those people who were making those records are now, they're not getting hired. Nobody cares. Everybody wants Butch Vig because Butch Vig did the Nirvana record. And I was fortunate enough to put up those Nirvana tapes at one point because I was working for somebody at Geffen, and they were signed to Geffen Records. And I don't know why the tapes had to be put up, but they had to be put up. So I put up those tapes, 24-track tape machine. It may have had 16 tracks worth of stuff on it.
Wow, okay.
And that was it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
The lead vocal was marked vocal. There was vocal 1, vocal 2, vocal 3, and then starred. No vocal comp. He sang it 3 times or 2 times or whatever, and they picked the best one.
Yeah.
No thump, thump, thump tape edits, right? Maybe 1 or 2 if there were any.
Mm-hmm.
So those dudes could play.
Yeah, exactly.
Those dudes had a sound they could play. And it totally changed the face of music into the 90s, right? And then you had all those, I mean, it came out of the Seattle area, but it totally changed the spirit of it all. You know, at the same time, you had the hip hop and rap thing going on, right? And then so parallel paths but spirit the same. It's just like kind of anarchist, the kind of just engagement, the kind of ignoring what's going on. And I think the time is ripe for that to happen. It's just a matter of what that is. I mean, who knows what to predict, but and I think it is happening. But the only difference is that things are so diffuse now. The delivery system's so diffuse. You would listen to songs on the radio, right? And that's how you would find things. You'd have your favorite DJ and your favorite radio station. Now, I've heard 20,000 songs a month are being put up on Spotify.
Wow, yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, who's got the time? I mean, I'm not sure that's the exact stat, but I'm kind of sure that's what I had read someplace. And who's got the time to sort through 20,000 songs? I mean, I'm lucky I get to listen to 5 new things a week, right?
Yeah, I mean, I find it really hard to find something new to listen to because, as you said, you know, I mean, there's a sea of things you got to get through before you find something. Yeah, that tickles, you know, your ears, basically.
Yeah. Well, that's why with a lot of my friends now, one of my first questions, if I haven't seen them in a while, or you know, what have you been listening to?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm curious, and it doesn't have to be new stuff. It could be old stuff. You know, I mean, I've gotten turned on to some amazing things just by, you know, hey, what are you up to? What are you listening to? What can't you get off your turntable, or what can't you get off your phone, or excuse me, however you listen to music.
Yeah.
And really eye-opening. And that helps me. That helps me creatively. It helps me, you know, kind of see what's going on in the world and what people are thinking about.
Yeah, for sure, man. But hasn't it always been, if you think about it, always been about the song, you know? It's always the song. I mean, that's a saying, I guess. No matter the production, I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, because the song has to be good enough. But how do you... You know, I mean, you work on some things and you think this is brilliant. It's the best song I've ever heard, I've ever worked on, and it goes nowhere. And then you work on something that's kind of like, what the hell is this? You know, this is so trite and it's so contrived, and suddenly it becomes a quote unquote hit, right?
Right.
But there's a difference between hits and great songs.
Yeah. What is it?
Right. Well, the difference is a hit has a shelf life and a little lifespan.
Sure.
I mean, you can think of a lot of songs that were hits, right?
Yeah.
And that sold and made money, right? I mean, you know, you know, not to single out Katy Perry, but you know, are those songs, are they Beatles songs? Are they stuff that's gonna, like, you know, are they gonna stick with you for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, it makes sense, man.
I mean, you know, Fireworks. I mean, okay, I get the sentiment. It does a thing, but am I going to listen to the Billie Eilish record, or am I going to listen to, you know, on that Billie Eilish record? I mean, there are songs on there that I know I'm going to listen to the rest of my life, right? Are they, you know, because they're engaging, because they speak to me on a level, and that to me is what a great song is all about, you know?
I need to check that album out. Actually, I haven't heard it.
Man, you have to. I mean, the production is ridiculously good. I mean, that Phineas guy, he's got a lot of brilliant ideas. Really super smart, you know.
Right.
But the Kendrick Lamar record's that way too. Damn, that's another one.
Yeah.
That record's incredible. You could sit there for a month and just write ideas down.
Yeah.
and just go, oh, look how they did this. Look how this happened. And so it's super inspiring to me, right? Because I can take that and try it in my context, the
Right.
context of what I do. Does it work all the time? Probably not. But those one or two things, and circling back to like Tchad Blake, it's like, okay, well, what did I get from Tchad? Well, technically, there's two things that there's one thing that I always do when I record drums, and it's completely because of Tchad. I use a mono mic and I put it over the kit and I put it relatively close.
Right.
And I even call it the same thing. Tchad used to always do it with a Sennheiser 441.
Right.
And I changed the mic out a lot. I'll change it per tune depending on what I want out of it.
Uh-huh.
But every time I do a session and every time I type that track name, it's always 441.
Right. Right.
You know,
That's cool. But something
Yeah,
with the Beatles, just talking about the Beatles, something that's always been mind-blowing to me is, and it goes with Led Zeppelin as well, I guess, and perhaps Pink Floyd, I don't know how old they were, but they were all so young when they wrote these great songs,
Yeah.
That to me is,
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
I don't know how the hell they had a brain capacity to do something like that,
Well, yeah, but they were, first of all, I mean, the Beatles case, right? First of all, they were in Hamburg playing. They were playing music all the time,
Yeah.
and they were playing what, 8 hours a night. Like these stories are incredible. Like, can you imagine being on a bandstand playing 8 hours a night?
Yeah,
I play
sure.
for 45 minutes and my fingers are sore, right?
Yeah.
And can you imagine singing in a club with the PA that they would have had at that time, and trying to get out and trying to get over all of this? So first of all, there's that saying, you need 10,000 hours to perfect your craft, right? You need to put 10,000 hours of work.
Yeah.
So the Beatles did that super early on in their career, right?
That's
And
true.
they found a way to find their voice on their instrument. They had to. It was survival
Yeah.
in a way, right? Because it was what they wanted to do. They were living in shitty conditions, but they were totally doing their thing. And then they studied. They loved music, right? And the other thing they did is they learned a lot of other people's tunes, which is what never happens anymore, right?
Right.
So how do you learn song form if you're not performing it all the time? They love Motown. They loved all of these records, right? They love all these early rock and roll records, and all of that seeped into what they did.
Yeah. That's a very good
All of
point,
it.
man. Yeah.
No, and so, you see bands and it's just like, oh yeah, we're gonna write songs right away. Learn 50 tunes, go play them someplace. I mean, granted, I'm dating myself with some of these names and some of these bands, but Van Halen, they were a club band and they were a party band. They had a whole set of tunes that they would play because they were young and they were like playing backyard parties and they were playing clubs in the LA area. But you hear in their writing the influences of, like, say, ZZ Top. I mean, there are things in Van Halen arrangements that are they totally ripped it off from ZZ Top.
Right.
Going to the 6th chord on a guitar solo. So it's
Right.
like key of A, they're jamming away, and then the solo comes up, and suddenly they're vamping on an F sharp chord, an F sharp minor.
Yeah.
Total rip off of ZZ Top. Total.
Right. Right.
And so when you listen hard enough, you can see those things, right? But they put in the time. They learned the tunes, and they learned songs from the inside out. And that's how you learn. You learn by doing, and by playing and by performing. You learn to be a performer by performing. Bob Dylan, same way, right? I mean,
Right.
all that dude did was he got up on stage and played.
Yeah.
He was, and we're not allowing ourselves as performers and players anymore to do that, right? To get obsessed with things. And that's the thing about youth. It allows you to become obsessed with things, right? It gives you license to become obsessed with something. And when you're obsessed with music, that's all you do. It's all you think about, right? So take that the next extrapolation. If you become obsessed with songs, then you're studying songs. You're writing out lyrics because you're going to go perform them, because you have to perform them for people. And that's what puts those people in that class. It just doesn't happen as much because we have so many distractions, and we don't allow ourselves to get inspired by new things, even as adults. I mean, I'm not a kid anymore, but I still feel like a kid in some ways. There are things going on in my life that are making me feel like I'm 17 years old right now. And it's awesome. And it makes me look at things differently. And it just helps everything. But you have to be open to it, and you have to work on it, and you have to let yourself be inspired. And it's hard because it's like you got your friggin' phone in front of your hand all day long. You've got all this distractions with Facebook and being liked by people, right? You got to get your likes up, and who the fuck cares?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm using language now. But
that's fine.
Whatever.
That's fine.
You can edit it out. You can beep it, or
I'll leave it in.
Perfect.
But it's true because I've been thinking about that, because I used to be, as you said, be obsessed with music. I was coming home from school playing bass or guitar, every day, and I haven't done that in a long, long time. And I'm fairly young, I guess. I should. Yeah, it's important not to lose that aspect of, because you learn so much.
You do, and it comes and goes. Like I moved to LA. When I was coming out of college, I was kind of obsessed with this guitar player named Mike Landau, who played on a ton of studio records. He was a session player. So there was Mike, there was Steve Lukather, and there was a guy named Dan Huff. And those guys were my three kind of heroes coming out of college. And so I thought, I'll move to LA. I'll work in studios. I'll get to play on sessions. And man, I didn't touch a guitar for like 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
When I moved out.
Yeah.
There was no time. I was working 80 hours a week. And when you work that kind of length on anything, it's like you come home, you're tired.
Yeah,
I looked at the guitar and it's just like, I'm not going to pick that thing up. What am I doing?
Yeah.
But it comes back around, and sometimes it's finding the inspiration. And finding the inspiration is the tricky part.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I started assisting in studios here in London, the main thing I found really hard was the hours. As you said, it can be 80 hours a week, and I always wondered why is that a thing in the recording making process?
I mean, now it's different because there aren't as many technical considerations. I mean, with the traditional or the former incarnation of studios, right? You had tape machines, you had microphones, you had consoles, you had wire running everywhere, you had electronic components. You had stuff that could potentially break. You had stuff that you had to keep an eye on to make sure that was working optimally. You had to align tape machines and stuff. And there are good parts and bad parts to that, right? The same way with modern record making, they're the same thing, right? One of the good parts about tape used to be the rewind.
Right.
Everybody had a chance to catch their breath, to collect their thoughts.
Right.
A singer had a chance to catch their breath and take their thought, and because right now it's just like you're singing, okay, do it again. And it's immediate. It's right there. And it takes a lot of focus, takes a lot of energy, but it takes a lot of physicalness too, right? But I'm using singers as an example because it's the most obvious one. So with tape, it used to take a finite amount of time. And I think that actually is something that's missing, right? That pace. You were forced to work at a certain pace. And it's not hours of time added on. But you still have to wait for the creative thing to show up, especially if you're quote unquote writing in the studio. And there was also, it sounds like you were at a time where that was happening. And when there's writing in the studio, there's always a lot of sitting around and twiddling your thumbs and things like that. Yeah. So I think it's that combination. And it used to be there was a budget and you had a finite amount of time. So, okay, I can only afford this studio for 3 days. Okay, how much time can I spend in the studio? Okay, well, okay, you get the studio for this rate and you get it for 10 hours. And that was some people's deal, right? And then there's overtime after that. Other studios, oh no, man, you can have it for it's a 24-hour lockout.
Right.
Really? I can be in here 24 hours for $1,500? I don't, it's not 10 or 12? No. Just pay for the assistant's overtime, And the assistant overtime at that point, if you're making 15 an hour, if you're, or making 10 an hour probably at that time.
Yeah.
Pay the assistant overtime. Okay, so it's time and a half. Okay, so it's going to cost me an extra $5 an hour over the 12 hours. Yeah,
exactly.
Of course I'm going to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
So the assistant's there, and the assistant's there for 15, 16 hours a day. I mean, I had 2 occasions where I didn't go home for 2 days.
Yeah.
One session ended and then the next one came in.
Yeah.
And there was no time for me to go home because I had to align the tape machine and I had to do all this stuff because I was working in places where I had to do all that stuff. That was part of my job as an assistant.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
And then before you know it, 3 days goes by,
Yeah.
And but you're super skinny, you're tired.
Yeah.
But that was the way it was.
Right.
And
Yeah, it's just interesting, I'd always been thinking about it, and yeah, I never really understood it to some degree. But yeah, it seems like, a lot of people go through it.
And overdubs in particular, overdubs were the worst. Overdubs were the worst because so if it was a rudderless ship, if nobody knew what they were doing or what they wanted to do,
right,
then it's like sitting around watching paint dry.
Yeah.
Then you're nodding off in the corner. Then you're being bored. Then you're just then you're going out and talking to the receptionist the whole time, or
Yeah.
And because it's just like, what am I going to do? I can't sit in here anymore. And
Sure.
And then the horrible ideas come out, and then they have to try them all. And so that was like the tough part. But
yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Was it just changing the topics a bit here?
Sure.
Going to present time. So I understand you don't have a manager, right? Is that true? Still true?
I do not. Nope.
How do you deal with payments and charging, setting your rates? Because I guess you do that yourself because there's no manager. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, even if I had a manager, it would be the manager would be negotiating the rates and making sure I'm getting paid, right? That those are the main functions of management. And so I've been very fortunate in that I haven't had very many issues getting paid from people over the years. Setting the rate is the tricky part, right? Because you want to be helpful to people, and sometimes I wonder if people see me on, or see some engineer, right, on the internet, right? I have a quote unquote internet presence. I'm a Pure Mix mentor. And I wonder if people think I'm not approachable, like to work on their project because of that.
Right.
This is a little side thing than what you're getting at. But I always wonder, like, if somebody, it's like, oh, I wonder if he would do that. And it's like, it never hurts to ask. And that goes back to the referral, the word of mouth thing. Somebody's heard what I liked. I mixed a couple of guitar players' records because of the Steve Gadd Band record, right? Some guy in Italy, I love the Steve Gadd record. Will you mix mine? Yeah, of course, sure.
Yeah.
And the pay has to be reasonable for my time. Don't get me wrong, but I don't expect somebody to pay me like some record label rate,
Right.
And so usually it's some type of figuring out if it's worth my time, what it's going to take me to do. I know what I want to make. I know what I need to keep the roof over my head and to deal with my bills, I mean, do I want to get rich doing this? Yes, but I'm not going to get rich doing it in certain aspects, right?
Sure.
And so 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 setting my rate, it's kind of a moving target. And it really depends on the situation. Am I looking at getting residuals in some way? Am I going to get if I'm going to get points on it? Am I going to get points on the recording or on the masters? The physical masters. Am I going to get publishing points? Am I going to be involved on a songwriting level? Because it's songwriting level as well, and because that's a whole other consideration.
Sure.
Because I do that, like I get involved, and that's over the years. I've kind of, I don't want to say forced isn't the right word, but it's been this evolving thing, right? My Italian friends say, we've all become polpo. We've all become octopuses. Right. So where I came up as an engineer, and then I got into mixing, and then I got into some producing and things, right? And then when the bottom falls out or those ways of making money aren't quite there, then you're doing those three things. And then, you want to hire this person who says they're a mastering engineer, but you gave them the song I just worked my ass off on for you, and it sounds nothing like what I gave you. So you know what? Let me master it. Mm-hmm. So now suddenly I start mastering some things.
Right.
And then, so then that becomes a little avenue. And then, this song's really good. It needs a bridge. What if you do this? What if we do that? Oh, check out these lyrics. Or what if we fine tune this?
Right.
Okay, let's record it. Okay, so now I'm a songwriter. Now I'm co-writing. Or sure. I did a song with this woman in Paris that it came out great, and we were in the process of getting her something going. And I'd written this tune. I had a melody line written and some like really lame lyrics, and sent it to her because I thought it would work for her. She came back with brilliant lyrics.
Okay.
Like within a day, she goes, "Oh, it makes me feel like Paris, like a rainstorm in Paris in the summertime." So she wrote this song called "Happy Rain," and the only English words are "Happy Rain." Everything else is in French. But she explained to me what it's about. It's brilliant. She kept my melody line and everything. So, had this whole world not started to develop, this wouldn't have happened. So, keeping all of these things going, and that's the challenge for the modern person trying to make music right now, right? It's like the specialization is getting less and less. I mean, there are those people who are doing it, and there are those people who are projecting that they're doing it. I mean, I don't know how busy some of these people are. I mean, I don't know how some people say they have 8 people working for them, right. but maybe they do.
Yeah.
Good for them. And that's great. But that doesn't, that's just not my world right now. And, right. Maybe it will be, or maybe I'll always be enough of a control freak to where, it takes a lot of trust for me to have somebody edit my shit. It takes a lot of trust for me to somebody tune the vocal.
Yeah, of course.
Because that stuff's important to me, and I hear it a certain way.
Yeah.
And I'm fast enough at it to where, not saying that somebody isn't faster than me. I'm sure there are people who are way faster than me at certain things, but it keeps me, it keeps the overall focus, and it keeps presenting the vision that I have. And right. That to me is what's important.
Yeah. But so if a band or artist reaches out to you, excuse me, saying, "Hey John, can you mix my album? Love your work, etc." Do you start charging price straight away, or do you try to build, find out their goals with the album or what they want to take it before you talk price at all?
I have a whole little mental list, right? Okay.
Right.
Are you signed? Do you have a budget? Right. Okay. 2 very important things. What do you intend to do with it? Send me the tunes. Because let me have an idea of what I'm up against. How many tracks do you have recorded? In other words, is it 40 tracks worth of shit, or is it 250 tracks worth of shit?
Yeah.
Because 250 tracks worth of stuff, that's a day. That's a day to just sort through.
Yeah.
Before I even start mixing.
Mm-hmm.
And then that tells me about their decision-making process, right? And right off the bat. Because if you have 250 tracks, somebody's not making decisions and they're expecting me to sort it out, right?
Yeah.
And that means there's no arrangement either. Like the arrangement's out the window. I'm going to get, oh, well, we're thinking of maybe this is cool, maybe this is cool. And when it comes to me at that point, you know, if you can't make a decision, then I'm going to make one. And then I'm producing your record. And then we have to talk about that, right? And then, so that's an extra layer of stuff. So I look at it in all of these parameters, right? If a record label's paying me, there's going to be a 30 to 90 day wait period before I get paid.
Right.
And so somebody's making interest on that money. That money's sitting when it should be in my pocket because I've done the work, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm probably going to think about charging more for that. I'm going to charge another couple of percentage points, or maybe a lot of percentage points, because I know it's going to be a hassle and it's going to take me time. And, you know, and then sometimes people are like, look, this is what I have. Can you do it? And if I have the time, you know, if I hear the tune and they say, this is what I have. And if I've got, you know, if I know it's going to take me X amount of hours to do it, or if I think it will, you know, here's what it is. You get 2 revisions and then we're done. Right. And then I can't put any more time into it.
Yeah. But, that makes sense.
You know, yeah. And I think that's fair. And at the end of the day, I want to be fair. I want people to come back. I want to help people realize what they're trying to do. Because at the end of the day, that's what's the most fun for me, right? The service part. I guess you would say service to a certain degree. I love assisting, right? I love being the person that in the background made the whole session flow. And when the session was done, by the end of the day, people got stuff done. I was never the slowest person in the room. And I allowed people to be the best artists they could be, or the best at what they were doing, right? And sometimes it used to involve just little things. I'm going to talk from an assistant perspective, but you can extrapolate this out to anything, right?
Sure.
You can, like, when I first started working with Chad and Mitchell, right, they would talk about doing an overdub. Maybe, you know, hey, you know, David, you know, the next thing we're going to do when you come back, let's do a guitar on this. Oh, okay. So David walks out of the room and I lean over to Chad. I'm like, well, what do you want? What mic do you want? And what amp?
Right.
And the first couple of times he just looked at me, because apparently nobody had ever really asked him that.
Yeah.
You know, because he's still sitting in the chair. So like his whole mode is like, oh, I'm just going to get up and do this. So the fact that I leaned over and would ask, you know, was huge. And that kind of makes you valuable to the situation. And then that's how people ask you back, right? You're paying attention. You're paying attention to detail. And those are the people, creative people, want around, right? Because you have their back. They feel safe. And that's what you want. And I think maybe that's the word I was looking for earlier, right? You want, this bridge between the technical and the artistic, you want the artist to feel safe. You want them to feel like they can do their thing. Yeah. And, you know, and that's a theme for me that keeps coming about, right? And like I said, there are things going on with me right now that are just kind of reinforcing that, you know? It's like, oh yeah, this is what makes it good, is feeling that, right? And I think that's what makes the best performance. That's what makes the best recordings, what makes the best mixes, you know? People who are confident in what they're doing and feeling like they're in touch with what they're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the moment you start working with people who are trying to guess, who are trying to make it sound like something, it's just like, what's the point? I'm much more interested in knowing who you are than I am you trying to be the next whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back. I mean, I had because I'm sort of thinking about something when you said that, because I had some of my own music that I made mixed by someone else. And it sort of ties in with what you said, because, you know, I don't know what that person had in mind, but it didn't sound anything, me being the artist, it didn't sound anything like I heard it in my head. And it sort of goes into what you said. So, first of all, how do you try to get in the artist's head so you so you sort of can meet their expectations of what they want their music to sound? Is it all reference based, or what's
Oh,
your
well, no,
process?
it's really that this is one of the best questions anybody's ever asked of me. Because it's really fascinating, and there's a couple of things, right? It's always try to put yourself in the position of the person on the other side, right? My personality is going to end up on your record regardless. Sorry, it's just my set of choices and my thing, right? But is it a thumb in your eye? Or is it this kind of like thing in the background that just kind of like, okay, somebody else gets me and is enhancing this, right? So for me, rough mix is always super important, right? I got to understand where you're coming from and what you hear as important. And so that's usually the first thing. The second thing, I don't like it when people say, I kind of hate it actually when say, they send me their song and they send me 6 tunes. Oh, I like it to sound like this, 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 and this. Well, you know what? There's no way it's going to sound like that, and that, unless you've copied it in some way that makes it derivative. Right. So fuck that. It really bugs me. And then especially when they go, well, I like the vocal tone on this, but I like the bass on this. And, oh, this one guitar effect on this. Look, it just means that you're not thinking about how you're presenting your thing. You don't have a cogent vision for the whole thing. And so after I get over my initial anger, oops, sorry.
Yeah,
After I get over my initial like, oh, here we go again, then I'm intrigued though. It's just like, oh, okay, then I start asking questions because, you know, obviously you're thinking about things, but how does those things translate into what you're sending me? Because I really just care about what you're sending me, because that's the only thing that matters. And so then the questions, so then it just begs more questions, right? You want to go in deeper. You want to really understand what you're dealing with. Yeah, like a friend of mine says, you got to dig deep for the facts. You know, you got to look. And so then it becomes a process of learning who it is. And sometimes you see that it's just this surfacey kind of thing, and you know you're not going to bring something to it. And this all happens in this vetting process early on, right? So like what it's going to cost. And that's why it all kind of ties in together, right? I'm thinking about finances as much as I'm thinking about creativity and am I going to be able to bring something to this? I mean, there's certain things that have been sent to me. It's just like, you know what? I don't get this. I don't really understand what you're trying to do. And when I hear the rough, I don't get it. And it won't be like it's bad or good. It's just like, I don't know what I can bring to this. It doesn't make sense to me. But if I'm intrigued at all, then it's questions. And then you start going through the tracks and you're like, if I have a question, then it's like, oh, what are you thinking about this? I mean, I have enough experience to where that doesn't come up all that much, but sometimes it's just like, hey, why is this here? You know, or it needs this. And sometimes things aren't complete. Sometimes the song's begging for a tambourine, but no one's put a tambourine on. Right. And, you know, and then my choice comes is like, do I play the tambourine? Do I tell them they should play a tambourine? But 90%, well, probably 99% of the time, it's just like, if I really feel it at this point, I'm just going to do it. Yeah. I'm going to play it. I'm going to put it on. I'm going to send it to them. And the first thing it's going to say in the email, hey, I put a tambourine on this. It feels like it needed it. Right. If you hate it, I'm happy to take it off. Right. If you want to play it yourself, and if you can get it to feel good, give me your version of it. Right. And I don't think I've had anybody ever just have me take it off completely. They may edit it. They may say, oh, take it out for the first chorus or take it out for here. But I think people appreciate that, you know, that I'm that invested in what's going on, that it'll actually, you know, that I'll try stuff.
Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned, you know, questions, you know, the importance of questions. And I remember reading this book from Tony Robbins. I don't know if you know the guy. But he said the quality of your questions determines the quality of your life, something like that. And You know,
Yeah.
just hearing
Yeah.
you talk about this, you know, it sort of reinforces that
Oh, that's interesting.
thing, you know, because
Hmm.
the better your questions are to the artist or whatever, the better decisions you can ultimately make, I guess, you know, as a mixing engineer.
Yeah. Yeah. Bob Ludwig. Bob Ludwig had the best quote ever, and I'm going to see. Actually, you know what? Give me 1 second. I'm going to go grab my laptop because
Okay,
I
it's
want to
fine.
read it verbatim because I thought it was great. Hold
Okay, yeah,
on.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Bob Ludwig said this like in a must have been a Mix magazine thing.
Right.
He said, "The way I see it, recording and mixing audio involves an indefinite amount of compromises. And the really good recordings are made by people who have evaluated every step in the recording process carefully and have chosen the best compromises. What it all comes down to is everyone's ability to use his or her ears."
Yeah.
And so the way to get to the root of those compromises, right, is to ask questions.
Yeah, exactly.
It's totally how to get there.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that's pretty yeah.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, and it's what makes it fun for me, right? Because the right situations, there could be, you know, the synergy happens then at that point, right? Then the artist is getting the best out of me, and hopefully I'm finding the best thing in the artist. And again, that's the goal, right? That's the service aspect. That's why I do this. That's really why I do this at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah, and
Yeah, yeah.
I guess you can, you know, to give better services, you know, to understand the client better, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. 100%. No, totally correct. Yeah.
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 So just final question here.
Mhm.
Do you have a favorite failure? As in something,
Favorite?
yeah, something that, you know, was maybe seemed like a failure at the time, but actually turned out to be really good. Something you learned from, something that helps you in the
Um,
future.
how can I put this? I kind of get what your question is, but I'm just going to frame it a little different, right?
Sure.
Um the turning point for me, or the big revelation for me, one of the biggest revelations, was just watching somebody be able to tune in to what it is they're imagining, right? And sometimes the ways are really subtle, sometimes it's profound. I did something with I got to record Al Green one time
Oh, cool.
for this TV show, Ally McBeal, years ago,
Hmm.
and we needed a lick at the beginning of the phrase of the song. And so he tries to sing one, and he's out there in the room by himself, right? And so we're all in the control room, and it's Al Green, and it's awesome, right? And he closes his eyes, and he goes, "Show me something." He puts his hand up in the air. "Show me something." So, no, not that. "Show me another." And then he looks at me and points at me like, "Go ahead, put the machine in record." I put the machine in record. He sings this beautiful lick, and we hit stop, and that's it. Done.
Wow, yeah.
So, and you see this with artists, right? You see them find a way to tap into to the greater thing. You know, I mean, Al's he's a preacher, right? He's a minister. So he's talking to God, right? He's tapping into something that's helping him realize his better self.
Yeah.
And so those experiences are the ones that are always reinforcing to me. And so granted, it's not born out of failure, but it's born out of observation. And that's the other thing, you know, maybe that's the thing, right? It's like being present, because if you're not present, you miss a lot of context, you miss a lot of details, you miss a lot of subtlety. And it's something that's really lacking, I think, in this whole business, right? There's not a lot of subtlety. It's people screaming at each other. And music at its purest form is the antithesis of that, right? I mean, society's this way too, right? You got to listen, and you got to be willing to listen.
Yeah.
And when you are, the world just opens up. It really does. So anyway, so
Yeah,
not really
yeah.
a failure, just more of a hopeful thing.
Yeah, that was nice,
So,
man. That was a
all right, Nicholas.
good ending. But so before we wrap up here, can you let the
Uh-huh.
listeners know where they can find more about you and maybe check out your work or hire you, for example?
Well, the website is johnpaternomusic.com or musicdephage.com. But just go to johnpaternomusic.com. It links you to the same thing. It's got a bio. It's got web info. I also do this thing called mix therapy, where I've been doing with certain people kind of online mixing tutorials where we do a Skype connection and another thing. There's a whole page about it on the site, but I've been basically just mentoring people with their mixes and with talking about, record making. So that's been super fun on top of it. But the discography's on there. There are Spotify links to a lot of the artists where if you just click on the record that you see on there, there's an all music thing. I'm on Instagram at Paterno Dephage. So it's Paterno and then DAFOZ. Mm-hmm. I'm on Facebook. I think I have all the social media links on the site as well, and
cool,
and email contacts. So
nice.
But this was super fun, man. Thanks. I really appreciate it. Your questions were really interesting, and
thanks, man. I appreciate that.
And I really might, I must have had the extra caffeine espresso this morning because I'm totally, totally chatting it up. So,
well, thanks for coming on, man. It was awesome talking to you, man.
Yeah, same here. Have a great rest of your day, and listeners too, man. Thank you for listening, and thanks for taking the time.
Awesome, man. Thank you, John, for coming on to the podcast. It was awesome talking to you, and I hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as well. Before you take off, please leave a comment and a rating below. And don't forget to download the free guide, 3 tested ways to increase your client base. Below, you can also find the links to John's sites and all those cool stuff. But that's it for this week. I'll see you guys soon.